Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of the podcast. This week, I wanted to invite Lucy, who has just launched a brand new PR agency, who helps people write press releases and etc. as well. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But thank you so much for coming back, and I hope you're going to enjoy and take some value from this episode. And I'll see you very, very soon.
Hi, I'm Lucy Rouse, and my business is Loose Cannon PR. Do you want me to say a little bit about myself, my background?
Yeah, let's do that. Welcome, firstly, to the podcast. It's a very exciting show where we talk about lots of things. It's very exciting. But for those who don't know who you are, what do you do? What have you done? And kind of, what field do you work in?
Well, in a nutshell, I was a journalist for 20 years, during which time I was freelance and I wrote for national newspapers and trade magazines about the media industry. And I had been editor of a trade magazine called Broadcast, which is for the TV and radio production industries. So hence writing about the media. Did that for 20 years, and then I moved to Salisbury and got involved with Salisbury Festival on the marketing side, communications, and I ended up working for all three arts organisations in Salisbury, the festival, the Arts Centre and the Playhouse. And as you and your listeners may know, they then merged to form Wiltshire Creative, and I ran the press office for Wiltshire Creative, so handling all of their PR. Wiltshire Creative had a really tough year. All the venues were closed, the festival was cancelled. I was furloughed for 6 months along with quite a few of their staff, and they had to restructure in autumn last year. And I'd sort of seen this coming and thought redundancy is going to be potentially on the horizon. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that as a positive. I'm going to take redundancy if it's offered, and I'm going to set myself up as an independent PR consultant. And that's exactly what I've done. And I used the name Loose Cannon, which I already had for a blog that I'd been writing from about 2008. And I sort of let that go fallow when I was working for the arts organisations. But I just disinterred the Loose Cannon brand and added PR onto the end and launched my own consultancy in the midst of a pandemic and an economic downturn and all of those things that we know. But I feel really positive about it. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, firstly, congratulations on your new venture. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Obviously we knew each other briefly from my work with yourself at Wiltshire Creative and that kind of thing. So, I mean, for me, I think it's interesting because as we were discussing before, obviously I know what PR is. Obviously, you know what PR is, right? But not a lot of people who necessarily are possibly getting into the space, or they're looking to build a media company, they want to create media content, they want to work in the industry. What is, like, from a simple term, what is PR and what does it do?
So PR, I would define it as the professional maintenance of a favourable public image, and that could be by an individual. Just think of celebrities, by a company or an organisation, could be a charity, which Wiltshire Creative is a charity. So it's deliberately managing the release and spread of information about an organisation or individual to the public, or to a specific market sector. So as businesses and charities, we all want to communicate with different groups of stakeholders, if you like, different audiences. So they're not just our customers or our visitors, but they're also our suppliers, they're our competitors or people, our peers in the same field, they're potential sponsors, they're funders, they're people who hand out awards, opinion formers, all of those groups. So PR is managing a favourable public image with all of those different audiences, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the follow-on question would naturally be, so then, Lucy, how do you do that? How do you have a favorable public image, or what are the things to do, what are the things not to do? Because for a lot of people who do listen to the podcast, I know this is an alien concept for them, right? Like it may seem to us like it's day to day, and oh yeah, you do this, you do this, you do this, but that's because we've worked in the industry or work in the industry, and we've done it for years, so we know. You know, you kind of pick that up with it whenever you get into the industry, etc. But I think it'd be useful to sort of, I guess, what would be your
Yeah.
like top tips of like what not to do and top tips to do, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Like
we can come on to that.
in regards to like how to not come across in the wrong
Yeah.
way.
I think the important thing to say about PR is that probably most organizations and small businesses are already doing some form of PR. If they've got a presence on social media, which just about everybody has. If they're writing a blog on their website, or they've got a news section on their website, they're already engaged in some level of public relations. And really, what I'm about is just being a little bit more strategic with that and kind of broadening it out into broader media relations. So, PR, how do you do it? I mean, it's getting into print or online publications, getting onto the TV if the story's good enough, or onto radio, could be local radio, could be national radio. It is social media, which is getting your message directly to your audiences. It's blogs on your websites. As I said, it's a news section that you might have on your website. It's video, which is where we've worked together for your website, or your social media channels. It's podcasts like this. All of that is part of PR, and really PR is part of the marketing mix, the communications mix. And it's a really cost-effective way of promoting yourself or your organization, essentially.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are the red flags or don't do's, or is there not any?
Oh yeah, I mean there are plenty. Um, I mean, there's a whole sort of separate field around crisis communications, where there are lots of red flags. Don't um, make sure you know where and how you want to engage with your audiences. So, on social media, for instance, don't respond immediately. Don't always respond online in a public forum, where you can take it offline. If somebody has something that they want to say about your organization or the service they've received or the product, absolutely deal with it in a timely manner, but make sure you take your time to be appropriate in your response. And that might be a private matter, not a public matter. Make sure when you're sort of getting your message out there, you're prepared, you're well briefed. Do your research in terms of where your audiences are and what you want to be saying to those audiences. So if you're invited to talk to a newspaper or go onto a radio station, do your research about who's going to be doing the interview, who's listening to the program or reading that newspaper, and think about what sort of messages you want to get across to them. I mean, I try and start every conversation with a potential client about, very strategic questions. So, what are you trying to achieve with your marketing? Is it awareness? Is it business leads? Is it sales? What is it? I want to know about if we're talking about a business, I want to know about their sort of core brand, their purpose, what problems they exist to solve for people, what their values are, all of those sorts of things. And then we go on to talk about their audiences, who those audiences are, what they like, what they read, what they watch, in their own time, not just when they're customers, to build a picture. And then you can select the channels through which you're going to communicate with your audiences, and then you can start to build your messages, and then go through the process of getting the messages out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, absolutely. I completely agree, and I think it's important to understand and appreciate, especially when you're new in marketing and you're starting a new business, right? Whether that's I make rings or I make custom bags, or I provide a service, whatever it may be, right? The you understand or you're aware of the fact that who your ideal person is, right? Like a lot what you're talking about there is your ideal consumer, your ideal customer, who your ideal person is, right? Now this person, there's a misconception when we talk about this in marketing that this person actually exists. They don't exist, right? They're not actually a person, right, that you can target. It's just they're the characteristics, as Lucy just very, very eloquently described, of what are they like, what do they do, what are they likely to enjoy, what are they not likely to enjoy, right? What culture references do they have or not, right? What do they look for in when they buy or not, etc. What are those things, and then what aligns with what you do as well, right? Like what quality control checks do you have in a company, for example, or what kind of culture are you trying to build, if you're trying to build your team, etc. What culture are you trying to build, etc. All these things are very important, because at the end of the day, no matter whether you're a team of 1 or a team of 20, you still have to be singing from the same hymn sheet, because and maybe, I'm sure you've had times as well where that may not necessarily be as true. Have you found, I guess the question there is, as you work with bigger organizations, perhaps sooner, now you're more freelance than your work at Wiltshire Creative, but even possibly them, that as the organizations get larger, it can sometimes be more challenging to come across the same way, come across with the same values, the same goals, the same approach.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that's something that's peculiar to large organizations. In a way, I mean, I just worked with a really, massive media organization, helping write a speech for the company who ultimately own Channel 5 and MTV and Nickelodeon and various things. And I think they have a very strong company culture. I think because it's so huge, it's assumed, that their employees are kind of signed up to their company culture. I suppose, the culture would be different within their different brands. That's a kind of holding company for a number of different brands, as I mentioned, whether it's Channel 5, MTV. So, the culture within MTV will be slightly different to the culture in Channel 5.
Yeah, of course.
But
yeah,
I mean, I would think across those brands, even there's great buy-in to what the purpose is of that particular TV channel. Um, um, and likewise, an organization with 60 people or 20 people, I mean, yes, you're going to have different views, but if their internal communications are what they ought to be, then everyone should be aware, even in a smaller organization like that, what the core purpose of the organization is, and what everyone's kind of signed up to do, essentially, whatever their role, whether it be finance, whether it be marketing, whether it be sales, whether it be, production.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's one of those things where it has to be put in line, like in the line in the sand from leadership, right? Like from the leadership when they created the company, and obviously they built the company. Every company you think of, unless it's in some ways like a more government-run organization, but even then, it's still bought and still brought up from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and then scaled up, right? So those core aspects are core to that company, and I think, like, this is more of a hiring thing, but also like when you look to see what clients you want to work with as well, you need to think, is this someone, firstly, like from a one-to-one basis, can I get on with them, right? Like as well. And that's something which I, personally, I think we found as we worked together as well, was, well, okay, well, can I actually get on with Colin? Right, as well, is, from that perspective. I mean, I was debating about asking this, but I'd be interested to hear back when because obviously the first event I did, right, as a company, was the liftoff event in 2018. Now, I don't know whether you will be able to remember, but I think it was somewhere along the lines of, I reached out to you and was just like, hey, I'm looking to do this, I'm starting to do this, is there anyone coming down to do this, etc. How was that experience for you, if you can remember?
I think it
Like
was
from your side.
We obviously weighed up. It was no risk, little risk, because you were just looking for interesting footage, which I knew we would have, because we were organising outdoor arts performances. and they would make great footage. And and you were suggesting that you'd do something interesting with that footage. And there was, and then you would share it on your social media and we could choose whether to share it. So, it was a relatively low risk proposition at that stage. And then, what kind of cemented it was, the film that you came up with was just lovely, and you captured things that we wouldn't have thought of, like the Wiltshire Creative logo on the back of a high vis vest that one of the volunteer stewards was wearing, and blended that in, and crowd shots and cutaways with shots of the actual performances and the artists, and came up with a really nicely branded summary of, part of what that weekend had been about. So, I mean, there was other stuff that wasn't so accessible, which was indoor. So, it only reflected part of the weekend. And you did a great time lapse of the fireworks, which were, it was amazing that we were allowed to set off fireworks from the cathedral roof. That was the Wiltshire Creative team and a lot of negotiation that allowed that to happen. But yeah, so it was a really lovely result. So it was great that you reached out, and that you just said, I'm just starting out and it would be great to see what I could make out of this. So it was nice to experiment.
Because for me, for definitely, I had no idea when I started and when I went down and when I reached out. I was just like, I just want to try, like, see what happens, And the reason why I asked you that is because I think it's interesting and I think it's valuable for the listener, because if someone's followed my journey, I talk about my journey a lot, and it's like, I reach out to local event organisers and etc, etc, etc. But for me, it's always interesting to hear from the other side, because obviously that's behind closed doors. I never get to hear or see that. But for me, it's always good to hear client feedback, because for me, it's how I make sure that I'm still hitting the goal we're aiming to hit, number one. Number two, but also making sure that whenever we create a piece of content, that it's valuable to whoever that may be, right? Whoever your target audience is. Because for people who don't know, and people who are new to getting hired by clients, it doesn't actually matter what you want in the film, because it's not your film, right? Like, it's the client's hired you to do a specific thing. So that's why having those longer communications and understanding PR and understanding what other messaging and other marketing is coming out at the same time is important. And I hope, anyway, again, I don't know, but I hope that whenever I took a project on with yourself, or in the future, if the guys from Wiltshire Creative are listening, that I'm able to help them understand how video can be an asset to them, number one. Number two, but also to understand that I appreciate the process, I understand the process, and I'm able to work with them, right? Because I think there's a misconception with some videographers specifically, or people who are newer in the industry, that they're going to be some looser cannons, perhaps, no pun intended, or there's some miscommunication or misunderstanding or etc, in regards to how the media space works. Does that make sense? I mean, have you found there is for newer people in that respect, like some of the newer people who are like, maybe starting out or etc, or just looking to gain experience, have you found that, or is it?
I think the differential that I would highlight is where you're so you came to us with an idea of doing something, and it was all very sort of organic. The opposite is where someone in a PR role or a marketing role in-house commissions a film, and they have a very specific idea. And we also did that, and I've done that with yourself and with other videographers, and you have a very fixed idea of the end product that you want. You want it certain length, because you're going to use it on social media, and people's interests, attention spans are very short, and yet you want to get in certain things. You want to get talking head with one of the senior executives from the organization. You want, company logo, you want ambience and atmosphere and panning shots. You need a clip of this artist, whatever it is, or this product, or this something that represents this service. So that's the sort of, the other end. And I think there's absolutely scope for that as well, which is a sort of highly commissioned piece of video. Collateral.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think for me, they're like different in regards to the relationship, but also two, in regards to like where, because one of the age-old questions I get, and I'm sure you get it in your field as well, is, oh, how do I get started in video, right? Like, and I hope, and the reason why I wanted to explore like how my first process was is because it's a very good example of how to get started in video, right? Like how to build a relationship with a potential client, right? At that time, I didn't see it as a potential client, but now looking back, that's what it was. It was, look, I'm looking to do this. I would love to see if we could do something, to see what there's this stuff going on. I'd love to see if we capture it, blah blah blah, etc. And then sort of seeing what, and then kind of handing the reins over to me to see what I can do with it. I think, and I think anyone who's looking to try video, it's always going to be beneficial for you to hand the reins over to someone who is passionate about video, who knows about video, who clearly has a want and a passion to do it as well, because then you can see what they can offer you, right, as well. It's not necessarily always about, oh, we have this brief, right, and we need to do this and this. Of course, they're important, right? Of course, that's important, and I'm sure, as the work you do now, you, in most cases, work to more of a structured brief more than a, yeah, Lucy, just write something, I'm sure it'll be fine, right? It's more of a structured brief, but I think there's also room and also merit in some context to have more free throw, made up, I guess, or more creative aspect from a videographer's perspective. Necessarily, I mean, the question, I'm interested to hear the answer, but for me is like, what role would you say for example, it's a brief, right, and there's like always some scope in a brief, well, from what I see anyway, about there's other things that we can do, or for potentially you would hire that videographer or that person because you like their style, you like the way they do things, you like their eye, etc. I mean, is that a role, is that a decision,
Yeah,
or is it
I think
simply
there is a
just,
role for that. I mean, it can definitely be a creative conversation. So, an organization or business, it will have, yes, a brief and an idea of what it wants to achieve. Um, but you're right, they'll have gone to, might be talking to a number of different videographers, or potential filmmakers, and they will have their different merits. And so those conversations should be open to, well, I could try this, I could do this, I've done this before, have a look at this piece of work, and then it's up to the organization to sort of make a choice of, which direction they want to
yeah,
go in.
yeah, exactly, and which person they feel is going to gel with the project specifically. I mean, the following question there is, how would you, or what advice would you give to people? Because I'm sure you've had this scenario as well, where, let's say, for example, that thing has happened, right? Like an organization has come to, say, 3 videographers or 3 writers in your case, and you end up not getting this job, right? For whatever reason, right? It might be you didn't suit it. It might be you were too expensive. It might be you were too cheap. It might be you don't have the level of experience that they were after, etc. Right? There could be 1,000 different reasons. What kind of advice would you give to someone about how to tackle, or how to think, or how to, from their perspective, how to deal with that rejection? Because I think it's one of the main hurdles for people wanting to continue to reach out about doing things is, oh, what if they say no? What if I can't do it? What if, or etc. What advice would you give to people who are in that position, or maybe in that
Well, I
position?
think firstly, don't take it personally. Don't be over attached to the outcome. It's not a personal thing. It's a decision that's been made on for whatever reason. And I think the second thing is to try and find out that reason. Was it a question of cost? Was it a question of experience? Was it a sort of a cultural fit? I think there's no harm in going back to whoever you were pitching to and saying, just out of interest, it's feedback for the future, isn't it? What was it that swayed your decision? So get the feedback, don't take it personally, and keep going, because I mean, there are different stats, aren't there? But is it for every 7 no's, you get 1 yes. Different people have different stats, but you need to sort of put yourself out there and be in
But yeah,
touch with people.
it becomes a probability thing, and that's why I say to like a lot of people who are starting out, especially now, I'm like, have you sent 1,500 emails yet? Right? If the answer's to no, I would recommend you go and write 1,500 emails.
1,500's a lot, but
granted, yes, but 1,300 to 1,400 of them are going to be no's or no responses at all, right? Then there's going to be like 50 that are like at some point possibly, but then there's going to be like the other 30, 40, whatever it is, that are going to be yes, let's do it. This sounds great, right? How much does this cost? How much can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Etc. And the reason why I use like a big number like that is because it makes the maths easy. Number one, but also number two, if you're not willing to do something like that, in my opinion, like that number, then you can't be surprised that you, especially when you're starting out and no one knows you, that you don't, have the level of momentum.
I mean, they are big numbers, and I've had lots of. I mean, God, this learning curve is so huge, isn't it, when you're starting out? For yourself, having been in-house for a while, and although I was a freelance journalist, but I've said this before, I never thought of myself as running a business, whereas now I do think of myself as running a business. There's a different sort of mindset, but I think you have to be realistic about the number of people you can work with, and realistically, and I think it's similar across lots of services. You can only work with, well, you have to work out what your capacity is. I mean, maybe 4 or 5 clients at any one time. Maybe slightly fewer, in terms of numbers of days in the week, quality time that you can give to each client. Now they might be time related, so those projects will come to an end, and you need to have been working on your marketing and new business for the next lot to be coming to fruition. But realistically, unless you're as a sole trader, you can't be working with tens of clients at any one time. I don't know, maybe do you disagree?
I mean, I think it's understanding what your personal limits are, right? Like I talk about this a lot, and it's like, I'll give you an example. Like what we were talking about briefly, like at the very, very start before the podcast, was, my concept of a lot of work and your concept of a lot of work, because of your priorities, may be different. So I measure myself on where I was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and a year ago, right? I don't measure myself on where anyone else is, because everyone else has different levels of priorities, right? I prioritize my career right now higher than most things, but that's a decision I make. That's a decision I have made, right? So my capacity, because of my available time, is higher because I'm giving more time to my career at this moment, right? Someone who has a family, or someone who perhaps, wants to spend more time with their friends, wants to do this, will give less time to their career or less time to their job, because they have their priorities are different, right? Their priorities in their personal life or their family life or etc. is going to be different, right? And there's no wrong or right answer here, right? You need to ask yourself, as a business owner, as someone who works, whatever, you need to ask yourself, how many hours do I want to work, and how many hours am I then willing to work, right? Because for me, there's a difference. If you're willing to work a large amount of time for a period of time, you can then get to the hours that you want to work and be able to earn the same, right? And it also then that comes to the other question of, what do you want to earn, right? And what do you want to do, right? One of the goals for me was being able to create video content and be able to run a media company full time. That was one of my biggest goals in my life. I've kind of done it now, right? So that was what the main strive's for. That's what a lot of my time was put into, a lot of my energy was put into, was because that's what I wanted to do. But also, in that, I had to make sacrifices on other parts of my life. Does that make sense? Like, so that, I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's kind of, I think for me, it's different because it's very personal. It's a very personal question, because you need to gauge you need to ask yourself, where are you right now in your life? Followed by, where are you going to be in 5 years? And what do you want to spend that 5-year block doing, right? Is it mostly career? Is it mostly personal? Is it a mix of both? Is it, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with that.
and it's there's no wrong, as I say, there's no wrong answer to that.
Yeah, it is a capacity issue, and it's about just being very clear on whatever your goals are, and setting those goals, and measuring yourself against them. Making sure they're smart in the sort of business jargon. So what is that? Specific or strategic? I can't remember what the S stands for. Measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. But I have very specific goals for my business, but it has to work for me, Monday to Friday, essentially, because I've got other responsibilities at the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, and also you have other responsibilities, but also you want those other responsibilities, right? Like you don't just want to work all of the time, right? At the moment that I'm, for example, like using me as an example, at the moment that I have less responsibilities than you, right? So I can work all weekend. I can also choose not to if I don't want to, right? But the thing is that people go, "Oh, you work so much." I'm like, "Yes, that's a choice." No one's putting a gun to my head and saying you have to work all the time, all the hours God gives. No, it's a choice I'm making, right? And I do take days off. I do take weekends off, etc. It's not like I work all the time every weekend. It's just at the moment, because of where I am and what I want to do, there's still things I want to grow in the business, and I want to grow the business. And how do I do that? I have to work for that. That I have to put the work in for that to happen, right? And there's normally more things than I can fit in a week that I want to do per 7 days, right? So the only solution there is to work on the other two in some capacity.
Yeah. And it's peaks and troughs, isn't it? I think, when you work for yourself, I've had weeks where, I might sort of come to the end, a natural stop, and go away and make some food for everyone in the house. But then I find I'm coming back to my laptop and working, because I've got stuff to do, working on till 10 at night. I mean, that's sort of my cutoff. I just think I'm not doing my best work after that time. Um, and then there are other weeks where that isn't quite so necessary. There isn't quite so much that's pressing. As I say, it's the ebb and flow of work, isn't it? But I think there are different thoughts about the hard work and the hard graft. I mean, I don't know if you've talked to Lindsay Burden at all as a business coach, but I'm doing some work with her, and she has an outlook, which I'm starting to share, which is that work should be joyful and easy. And and it helps with your decision making. You have that
of course
mindset.
it shouldn't be, oh, I hate this,
No,
right?
God, no.
Like there's parts that I dislike more than I like, right? But I still love everything I do, right? Like it's the question of, like, it's different to earn it like working in a job that you dislike, right? For me, right? It's like you always need to ask yourself, when you're doing something that's quite monotonous or something that you don't like in your own business, is it better than what you were doing at a job? Are you enjoying it more than you were doing it at a job? If the answer is yes, then you're fine.
Or another question,
right?
Can you outsource it? There's strength in asking for help. If there are things that one doesn't enjoy in the business, whether it's to do with accounting or whatever, you reach out for help, because there's plenty of people out there who will be able to support.
And it's also important to understand where you are in business as well. And I'm glad you brought up outsourcing, because as your business grows, your time is going to stay the same, right? But you'll get to a point where you don't have any time left, or the allotted hours you give yourself to work, or you allow yourself to work, you want to work, get full, and there's still a load to do. So the only way you're going to be able to get all of the stuff done is by then outsourcing it to other people, right? And I think outsourcing is very, very valuable. And personally, for me, I try to outsource as much as humanly possible. And that's only because I know that for me to be able to grow the business and for me to be able to do the best work, I need less on my plate and less in my mind. So if I've outsourced it, I could be like, oh, so-and-so's handling that. Great, cool. I don't need to worry about it because it's being handled, right? And if there's a problem, they'll come to me about it, and they'll say, oh, we need such and such. Oh, we need this, we need that, So I think for me, and a lot of business owners have said, oh, but it costs so much to outsource. And it's like, well, at the initial onset, yes, but what's the opportunity cost of doing it, right? Because if you can grow the company times 3, which means you earn 3 times more money, arguably you're making money whenever you outsource, arguably. Because if you, for example, say your hourly rate was, I don't know, for the sake of this conversation, let's say £50 an hour, right? And you're paying someone to do something that would take you 3 hours, but you're paying them £30 an hour to do it, and then you can fill that 3 hours with the time you're getting paid £50 an hour for, you're making money. Because even after you paid out the money, you're still making £20 an hour. So you're still up, right? So the conversation should be, in my opinion, about outsourcing is the opportunity cost, and if you're not at £50 an hour yet, is the opportunity cost of you outsourcing it to someone who's £30 an hour, £20 an hour, whatever it may be, gonna mean that you're able to get to that £50 an hour, £75 an hour, £100 an hour, £150 an hour, whatever it may be, sooner, right? Are you able to get there sooner because you have less on your plate, which means you can focus on the steps which need to go into you being able to become whatever it is per hour, or whatever it is per project, or whatever it is that your understanding or your perceived want, if we're talking financial. Perhaps there's obviously other elements when it comes to business, but financial is something which people can gravitate towards and understand very, very well. That's why I like to use it as a yardstick, because people can understand it quite easily, right? Because everyone's goals or perceived growth is different.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, absolutely. I'm reading a great book at the moment, which is recommended by Joe Middleton, who's running WYSIWYO's sort of education clubs holiday, and I don't know if there's an after school offer, but it's called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber or Gerber. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce his surname, but it's all about basically setting up a business in order that it can run without you, so it doesn't all hinge on you as a personality at the center of it. Sort of along a franchise model, although it's not, it's not limited to franchises. Certainly, I'm never going to franchise loose cannon. But it's really interesting about, how you just sort of document everything and set it up strategically, so that essentially somebody else could walk in, you could sell it, or somebody else could walk in and, run it without you. And it's quite an interesting way of thinking about running a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the benefit there, to this point, is then you can basically bring someone in below you or above you, depending on how you think about your hierarchy, to run the company, and then you can basically only be there to fix problems and then work on growth of the company, right? It removes a lot from your brain, because you're not having to think about the day-to-day, right? A lot of business owners, especially when they start out, they don't think big. In my opinion, they don't think big enough, where they're like, okay, well, what if I was the CEO of Brunner Media instead of just Brunner Media,
exactly.
for example?
And he's right? Very clear on, that you should be 3 people in one. You're the technician, so you're the person, in your case, who knows how to make and edit films. I'm the person who knows how to do PR and write press releases and get people media coverage and social media and copywriting. But you also need to be your own manager, so making sure that you're working in a time efficient way, and you need to be an entrepreneur, and you need to be thinking about where the business is going next, and how you're going to evolve your offer, etc., how you're going to continue to solve people's problems with your offer in new and creative ways. So and
also I think it's part of like being an entrepreneur is seeing the problems that will come, and then be ready to be the solution before they've happened, right? So before there is a problem, be ready to be the solution. So when the problem does occur, you're already there, you're already known for that, whatever that is, right? Because then you can be ahead of your competition. And I think that's, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's really important for a lot of business owners. And I got a lot of slack when I was starting about thinking about that way, but it shows what kind of mindset you have, in my opinion. If you're thinking about it as, yeah, at the moment you are every single person in this hierarchy, right? You physically are every person, but then it gives you a very good understanding, a very good clarity of who, when and if you're in an opportunity to be able to employ someone, who you should bring in and what they should do, right? And also, in my opinion, you should never bring in someone that you haven't done their complete job for, right? So, for example, I'm probably going to hire editors in, right? I do hire editors, I outsource editing, etc., right? That's one of the main things I do outsource. This podcast is a key example of something I outsource. I don't edit my own podcast anymore. But I edited my own podcast for 30 episodes. So I know how to do it. I can do it with my eyes shut, right? Because there will be times, even when you have a team or even when you work with freelancers or whatever it is, where things are not going to necessarily go to plan, things are not going to happen, things are going to be late to happen, whatever, because there's problems, right? Because things happen in life, right? And it's about them being in a position where you're able to say, right, okay, this is what needs to happen by this when. Okay, what's the solution here? Okay, I need to do this, this, and this. Cool, I can do this faster because I've done it or whatever, and then you can get the result to the client, or you can get the podcast out on time, or whatever it may be. Whatever the thing is that you're talking about, right? I think it's important to appreciate that and also understand that when you're looking to outsource to anyone, especially if it's like you're going to employ someone, to an extent, you should understand at least basic. Maybe not if you're like an accountant, right? I'm not expecting you to understand accountancy better as an accountant, right? But if it's a very specific field and it is tied to what they could do for clients, it's very important that it goes through you before it goes directly through the client. So you can have that quality control and quality check, for me personally, right? And also, just for clarity's sake, for any clients that are watching, no, I don't outsource any client work at all at the moment. I clear my plate of everything else I do outside of client work deliberately so I can take on more client work. That's the reason why I outsource it, and then I can quality control my own work, and if there is a slip in quality, it's on my brand and not on the client's brand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there are, again, other views. I'm just thinking of the television industry, which I wrote about for years, and there are regularly sort of little controversies that flare up about somebody who's got a job, either commissioning or in management, and somebody will say, well, they've never made a program in their life. They're not a journalist, they're not a filmmaker, they're not an editor, they don't have, but they will have other skills, leadership and management skills, which is why they've been appointed to the position they've been appointed. So I don't think you always need to be a technician, but when you're talking about growing from a one-person operation, I absolutely take the point that it's best to have first-hand experience of the job.
I think it depends on what the goal is and what role they're coming in as, right? For example, if I'm hiring a video editor, yes, I need to know how to video edit to be able to know whether they're good or not, right? Like, simple as that. If I'm hiring an accountant because I don't know enough about accounting and my accounting's giving me a headache, then I don't need to know. I'm like, okay, how much does it cost for you to fix this problem? Okay, there you go. It's like, it's
and
not.
You want to know that they've done a good job for other people. You might go and talk to some of their other clients, and you just find out.
Yeah, and that's where, like reputation and PR and testimonials come involved, and it's funny we've come full circle, which is nice. But that's why public relations happen. I forget who said it, but it was, your brand is what people talk about your business or you when you're not in the room, right? Like that's the main. That's not my quote. I forgot who it's from, but some billionaire probably. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And I'd like to end off the podcast a little bit with giving you an opportunity to ask me a question or throw in a topic specifically to us to discuss for a couple of minutes, just because I've been sat in interviews before, and you have those questions in your head. Is like, should I ask? Shouldn't I ask? So is there anything that you want to ask me, or a topic you want to throw in, or etc. before we finish up?
Okay. What do you think is a natural or typical person's attention span for a piece of video that they come across on, I guess it's different for different media. Let's say Facebook. How long do you think somebody's going to give?
To be honest, I mean, average is a very difficult thing, because the problem is, right, one person could watch the whole video for 15 minutes and that would throw your average off, for example, right? But a rule of thumb is normally the shorter the better. But that doesn't also mean long content can't work. Long content's harder to make work. It's a lot more work, because for example, you have to keep on average, you have to keep someone's attention, or have something change, or have something tweak, or have something that holds their attention every 8 seconds, right? So that's quite easy when you're talking 1 minute. That gets quite challenging when you're talking 15, right? So that's why on average, right, the people who, or the concept is shorter is better. In most cases, that's true. However, you're going to have people who are invested in the topic. For example, it also depends on the kind of video, right? But if, for example, it's a tutorial and that person really is engaged and really wants to learn whatever you're talking about, and everything you're saying is gold to them, then they'll sit for as long as the video is. Right? They'll sit and watch the entire video from start to finish, and maybe watch it again, right? So it's a difficult one to say, because it depends on the kind of video, it depends on who's the market and who's the person like that you're actually trying to target and talk to. But there is ways, like, whether that's adding cutaways in, whether that, that's the whole point of cutaways, right? That's the at a very basic level, that's the point of cutaways, so that you can have something visually change whilst the audio stays the same and you're still consuming the audio based content that the person's talking about, right? But so does that answer?
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question,
does.
but
I mean, you said
it's
the shorter the better,
semi-complicated.
But it definitely depends. Yeah.
The simple answer is shorter the better. But that doesn't mean create a 3-second video and it's going to be watched by everyone for 3 seconds. Because if it's still bad, it won't be watched. If it still doesn't have a point, doesn't have a purpose, isn't structured, isn't etc. Maybe 3 seconds is too short, but even 30 seconds, right? The majority of people who have fall off after 10 to 15 seconds is very, very high. And there is, every single Facebook media or Facebook, Instagram, etc. They all show you where the drop-off points are. They will show you what the interaction rate is. And, in most cases, most of these platforms now care more about how many minutes people are watching, more than how many views a video gets. In the early days of YouTube, Facebook, etc., you could just go, oh, I've got 1 million views, and that's great. Even if the view counted after 2 seconds and then they clicked off, right? Now, to be honest, most of the time it's, have they watched the video for a significant period of time?
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Challenge for all of us.
Absolutely. So those people who may be interested in hearing more about PR, maybe looking to hire you, looking to talk to you about PR, what you can do for their business, etc. Where's best for them to reach out?
It would be lovely if they look me up on LinkedIn as Lucy Rouse, and look at my website, which is loosecannonpr.co.uk, and it's loose, Luce.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time.
Not at all. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gents. I hope you did take some value from my and Lucy's conversation. And thank you so much for Lucy for joining me once again. And we're going to be bringing the podcast back once again next week. And I'm in this weird situation again where I have no more booked in at the moment. So I have absolutely no idea who's coming on next week. But we'll cross that bridge next week. So I look forward to finding out with you sooner rather than later. So have a wonderful week. If you did enjoy this video and you would like to see more, make sure to leave the video a like. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. And I'll see you very, very soon.